Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and start. I'm Evan, the E-Director, and I realize that I have not been online on YouTube on this side for quite a while. I've been fairly active on my Twitter, my Instagram, and also my brick filming YouTube channel. However, most of my subscribers here are here for my video essays, or whatever you want to call them. I'm still kind of not sure. I'm going for a different kind of style. I did something similar to this with my Justice League review. However, this isn't even a review. This is kind of just a more generic video essay. The Incredibles 2 just came out, and I just literally barely got home from seeing it, and I had to get this off my mind. This is completely unscripted, so my bad if I just start to ramble. After all, that is why you're subscribed to me, right? The Incredibles 2 was extremely enjoyable, and I really liked it a lot. However, the film tended to stay on kind of like the safe side, and it was fairly predictable. However, I don't think it took that much away from the movie because I still really loved it. I'm currently 16, and I was 2 when the first film came out, and I literally grew up with that movie. So that movie is part of my childhood, and that's why I was so excited for a sequel. Now, the whole point of this video is not to review The Incredibles 2, but describe sequels and their relevance in today's modern society. Movies are relevant, movies are popular, and usually only because they tend to our personal interests, and that's kind of what movies are about. Not everyone's gonna like the same movies, and that's okay. We all have our different opinions, and everyone does that, and it's just part of human nature. I can't control what you think, and you can't really control what I think. Movies are made to pique our personal interests, and filmmakers don't count on everyone liking a movie. And even more so, movie sequels are kind of risky. Sometimes movie sequels are wanted by the public, other times they're not. Sometimes they're made purely because of money, and other times they're made purely just to continue the story that we liked. The Incredibles 2 kind of felt like that. It was kind of a way for Disney to get more money, as if they need more money. But it was a way for them to not only retrieve or receive more money, but for Brad Bird, the writer and director of The Incredibles 2, and I believe he also wrote and directed the first one. I know he directed it, I'm not too sure about the writing part. But he wrote and directed the second one, and I feel like this was just a way for him to continue his story, and that's okay. Movies aren't just about money anymore, it's about telling a story. Everyone has a different story they want to tell, and in different ways they're going to tell that story, whether through a novel or a cartoon show or anything. Any way you can continue a story, sometimes you just want to do that. Some movies don't need to be continued, and some movies really do need to be continued, in which case Avengers Infinity War ended off of a cliffhanger, and honestly, some people liked the way it ended and some people don't, and are really looking forward to the sequel, or Avengers 4. I don't really know if you want to call it a direct sequel because, well, it's the 4th movie in the franchise, and I believe it's like the 22nd in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, the Marvel Cinematic Universe works because it piques our interest in different ways. Thor Ragnarok was a fun buddy cop film. Both Guardians of the Galaxy films are amazing sci-fi films. And Avengers Infinity War is just a giant spectacle. The Marvel Cinematic Universe works because of these different ideas of a movie. Just a movie working on the same level doesn't work. Captain America the Winter Soldier is a political thriller that most people like, others don't, and that's okay. Thor Ragnarok, again, buddy cop film, space buddy cop film that some people like, some people don't. However, some of these films aren't actually sequels, though they are continuing a story, and that's one way to move it. This doesn't always work out the same way. I mean, Universal's got their Dark Universe that is really off to a rocky start. Then there's the DC Extended Universe, beloved by some, not so beloved by others, and that's okay. Not everyone's gonna like the same things. My point with this video is, are sequels relevant today? Sometimes. Sequels aren't always the first choice. However, sometimes when a filmmaker makes a film, they kind of finish it off thinking, do I need a sequel? Do people want a sequel, and how much would it risk? In the case with The Incredibles, but I'm not too sure they wanted a sequel. Maybe Brad Bird did, maybe. I didn't really do too much research into this, but I just wanted to kind of talk about sequel relevance. The Incredibles came out 14 years ago and ended on a cliffhanger. Some may call it a good cliffhanger, some may call it just a nice way to end the movie. Kind of explaining that, hey, we've got a superhero family now, and some may argue that we didn't need a sequel. Some may argue otherwise. Some directors and filmmakers as a whole aren't necessarily against sequels. However, sometimes it's just not their first instinctive thought. However, in the case that the film may end up getting a sequel one day, a lot of times they will leave open endings in the case that it does get a sequel. The movie may end with a cliffhanger, or maybe it's just a good ending. Everyone sees things differently. Some people want the sequel, some people don't, and that's just how it works. However, sequel relevance sometimes just varies. And with The Incredibles, they waited 14 years before they made a sequel. Now, sequel relevance sometimes like I said, it does vary. Sometimes a sequel is needed, and other times it's just made for money. However, I think in the case of The Incredibles 2, it was purely made for the story, and maybe Disney had their own motivations, but it looks to me like Brad Bird really did what he wanted to do with this. Now, when it comes to sequel relevance, I have to say, I think The Incredibles 2 is extremely relevant, at least now. However, I think if The Incredibles 2 was made maybe like 2-3 years after, that would have been waiting too long. And I know that's kind of hypocritical, or that's kind of contradictive, but waiting 14 years was both a dumb yet brilliant move. Sure, people were waiting years and years just to get a sequel, and finally they got it 14 years later. See, not waiting long enough for a sequel could have disastrous consequences. Depending on the style of film, for example, Avengers 4 is coming out next year, and Avengers Infinity War literally just came out a couple months ago as of the recording of this video. See, in that case, it's different because that's a two-part story that's meant to be told in two parts. With something like The Incredibles, you want a sequel, especially ending the way they ended it, or the way they ended the first movie. You just kind of want to know what happens, and maybe that was answered in a novel. I don't really read that much, but it was answered in The Incredibles 2, and I'm sure some people were satisfied with that answer, whereas maybe others weren't. My point is, sequel relevance really does vary, and in the case that they waited any less for The Incredibles 2, I think it could have been dangerous. Waited any longer, it still could have been dangerous. I think they picked a perfect time for The Incredibles 2, and I think that's brilliant because, well, I know for me, I was extremely excited. I know I've been seeing a lot of stuff on Twitter about, hey, leave your kids at home. I mean, that's a whole other thing for a whole other day, but obviously, even the adults are excited for this movie. Why? Because 14 years ago, they remember the experience of seeing The Incredibles. It's different. Sequel relevance does matter, and I think in this case, this sequel was relevant. There are plenty of other movies that I think have irrelevant sequels, and that happens. It's just a risk, and it's just kind of going too fast, and it just happens, and sometimes you can't control that. Sometimes you're just a little desperate just to make a sequel. And I think in this case, Brad Bird did a great job. Waiting 14 years, I'm not really sure whose decision that was. It was kind of odd, but hey, the movie picked up right after it ended, and 14 years later, here we are. The Incredibles 2 was great, in my opinion. Maybe you didn't like it, but I loved it. It had its problems, but I still loved the movie. And part of that reason why I loved it was because I'm 16. I was 2. I remember being at the theater. I know that's kind of weird, but 14 years ago, I remember being with my parents, sitting in the theater for The Incredibles. Say what you want about it, but 14 years later, sitting with my grandparents, seeing The Incredibles 2 really made a difference. I felt good. Not just because I get to see a movie 14 years later that I've been waiting for a while, but because I was with family. And I think in the end, that's kind of what movies are. Sometimes they're made for money. Sometimes they're made for continuation of a story. But other times, sometimes it just goes down to family. And I think the film also portrayed that well. But like I said, these are just stories for another day. The Incredibles 2 meant something to me, and I'm sure it meant something to you.
You sing la 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 la.